Hey everybody, this is LMP Games, and welcome back to episode 7, I believe. Yeah, 7 of our RPG Maker MV plugin development tutorial series. So, over the course of the last couple videos, last couple episodes, we went through and made a plugin. Started really fast, kind of built on it sequentially, and kind of walked you through the process of how that plugin developed into a more complex one. The reason we broke it apart like that was because I wanted to show you each stage and introduce some of the more complex concepts over a bit of time and space, so you had time to like go through and mess around with things to get a better understanding of what's going on with them. What was going on with those the way that we implemented things. But we finished the plugin in the last episode. It is now a fully kind of functional, albeit not very practical, plugin. So now, one thing we didn't have time to do though was documentation, which is, if you're releasing a plugin for people to use, a pretty big step. It's going to be your next biggest step after actually making the plugin itself, because you're going to have to do a good amount of documentation to document everything, how it works, what to do to make it, what to do to configure things, and go over all the features and whatnot, and potentially have a list of known bugs that you're working on, known incompatibilities, and you really want to make this as detailed as you possibly can, because this is going to save you time in the long run, because people are going to be able to read all this and figure out how to use stuff. You'll get less questions on how to use it, hopefully. Doesn't always work out that way. Famously, people on the internet don't read things, but it gives you something to say. Oh, go. Somebody brings a question, you say, "Oh, it's in the documentation. Go look at the documentation." You don't have to like explain the thing out to them. So we're going to do that first, and then we're going to talk about the core plugin. And the reason we're going to do these together is because it's not really, the core plugin is not enough for a video on its own. Not yet. If we were doing this a bit later, like 2 more plugins in, maybe, because we'll talk about why. But just with this plugin, no, because we really are only going to have maybe 1 or 2 things we're going to do with the core plugin outside of just talking about what it is and conceptually why it's a good thing, and how you can utilize it. First of all, though, let's dig into this documentation for this now. So, for documentation on GitHub, we need to use a README file. First, let me create a new branch, actually. Oh, and I need to do this, too. Let me do the zoom. Control equals, so I can just do that. There we go. So let me go ahead and set up a new branch. Get checkout. I'm just going to do a checkout off of 5 here. We're going to call this 1001.6 documentation. Alright. So, for documentation, we have on GitHub, we have this thing called a readme.md file. Talked about this a bit in the first couple videos. When we got into, I think it was in video 3, when the beginning of video 3, episode 3, we talked about Git and GitHub, and a little bit in the first part of episode 4 as well, I think. Well, now we're actually gonna go through and we're gonna make this useful. So, what what we're going to do is we're just going to do all of our stuff here. All of our documentation here. So first thing that you need to know is that you don't have a whole lot of formatting options. You have headers, you have font size with the headers. You can do italics, you can do bold, you can do quote blocks, you can do code blocks. You can do lists and things, but you can't do color coding. You can't have colored text. You can embed images and links and things. So if you wanted to like make headers for your documentation that are like images, you could put those in, because then you could have like whatever you want to for, you know, the design of it, because it's a literal image. But you have very limited access to any CSS, if any at all. Markdown is really strictly handled. It's a bit of a pain in the ass, to be honest. Like at the very least, we should have access to coloring text. You can get away with it in some cases. Like, I think in some cases, some people like use hyperlinks without like a link on them and like maybe some things to make the links not actually links to get the like the blue underline kind of styling or something like that. But we're not going to worry about any of that. We're just going to be using general headings, bold text, and lists and things like that of that nature for this. Maybe images occasionally. For this one we won't really, because we don't really have anything that we need to show. If you have like visual elements that change based on plugin settings, that's when I would say is your most common use case for using images. Also images to show off the actual plugin itself. And in this case we don't really have anything we can really show, because it's all, you know, background coding. There's no visual aspect to it. So we probably won't have dialogue, any images for this one. So the first thing I like to do is, the very first line I like to have it be the name of the plugin, and I like to have it be a single heading. And actually what we can do is we can set this to, oh, it's already set to Markdown, good. If you have, I don't know if this is a prettier thing or if this is automatically in here with, let's get rid of this. Automatically in here with VS Code, but there's a list of all these different languages you can use. And if this is not set to Markdown already, set it to Markdown. So that's what you'll need. So to do a heading, you'll use a hashtag. The number of hashtags determines the heading you're going to use. So one hashtag is heading 1, which is the largest heading you can have, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 5, and eventually you'll get to where it's just kind of bolding the text and there's no other things about it. But the very top level heading I like to do is the plugin name. So we're going to say Dialog Selector. Then underneath that, I like to put just a short description of what the plugin is. The Dialog Selector allows you to create a rudimentary. What you could do also is you could write this in like Word or something and then copy paste it over. If you're worried about spelling things, I'm not going to worry about spelling this. I'll go back through and clean up anything that's spelled wrong later on. Rudimentary, branching, dialog, system, using, and you don't really have to worry about line breaks and things. GitHub will automatically word wrap things for you. So you can just keep writing until you hit a specific point you want to stop, like a sentence or a paragraph at, then you just create another paragraph. So dialog system using a plugin setting for configuration of NPC dialog per map. Dialog can also be set up to require certain switches to be active in order for that dialog to be shown. When used in combination with some eventing, you can create a basic dialog system. Okay, so then underneath this, I usually have like some just general information such as plugin project, and I'll put a link in here. So I believe the way you do a link is you have the name, so we're going to say plugin project. Well, let's say plugin version first of all. This is going to be 0.1. We're going to put a break there. I think it's BR for Markdown. It's either that or you have to do 2 spaces to make sure you have an extra line. We're going to say plugin demo, and then I think you have to put it in parentheses for the link to work. I'm just going to put in what I think the link will be. Let's see. I think there should be plugins demos. Demons demos. Now we're gonna say I'm gonna call this tutorial plugin underscore dialog selector, so we'll go with that. Tutorial plugin 1 underscore dialog selector dot zip. Then plugin project http:// Now you don't have to use the same kind of naming conventions I am for this stuff. This is how I do it. So it's the plugin name. So it'll be like the thing you use for your handles. So in this case, we're just using tutorial plugin. If I was actually releasing this as a plugin I made, it'd be LMP games underscore dialog selector. The underscore demo or project, and then the version number for that, all separated by underscores. And then zip or rar 7 7Z or whatever you're using for your archive software. Alright, so we got those in there. Then we're gonna say usually I'll put like a how to install, how to use. So I'll say like installation as a level 2 header. Because sometimes he has specific instructions you need to have, like you say, oh, you need to have X, Y, and Z, and then like these are optional plugins you can have and stuff like that. In this case, we're going to mention that you'll need to have Yanfly's message core plugin in this. Download the plugin file either from using the demo or project links. Or from the repository. Place the .js file into your js/plugins folder, and then add the plugin to your project in the plugin manager. Do we really need message core? I guess for word wrapping, yeah, right. Is highly recommended, but optional. And a future version support for specific message core functionality will be added and can be turned on if required. So highly recommended but optional. because it just allows you to do word wrapping, so it makes this plugin work a lot easier, right? Than if you just like do single lines and stuff. All right, what's next after that? So next I like to do a section for talking about plugin settings and plugin commands and note tags if they're there. So, and I call this section about the plugin or something similar to that. Been a while since I've written actual documentation for a plugin. I think it's either plugin information, we'll call it. And then we'll put a thing here that says this section contains information relating to plugin settings and commands used with this plugin to learn how to use and what certain commands or settings do. Continue reading. If you are looking for configuration information, see the configuration settings section below. So we're going to have a section after this, a level 2 heading section after this called configuration settings. But this is going to be just plugin information. So then we're going to make a level 3 heading that's going to say plugin settings. And then what I like to do here is I just like to just basically go through and just give you everything about the plugin settings, how they work, what they do, what the options are, what it enables, that kind of stuff. If you remember over in here, we have like a description thing we can add. So essentially you're going to take this description that you have that kind of basically describes what these do, and you're going to fully flesh it out into like a here's actually what it does kind of thing. This is more of just like a generalization of what it does, because you can't really put what it really does in the short amount of text you get. So the documentation is a good place to actually tell the developers what they do and how they work. So for this, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up the project and use that to work off of, as opposed to swapping back and forth between these two tabs. Now, I would just go from top to bottom, just through the list. Just keep it in the same order. That way, it's easy. It's more easily identifiable. And for this one, you're either going to want to do a level 4 heading, or you're going to want to put it in bold. I usually do level 4 headings, so every major step down, you do a new level of heading. We're going to call this Enabled Dialog System. And then we're going to put a breakpoint here. Alright, I don't think we even have one there, but we'll need to use breakpoints in here to make sure it's this far. Well, maybe not. Let's actually go ahead and, let's go ahead and save this. And let's push it up to the repo and see what it looks like. Git commit am 0.1 or 0.1.6. Starting documentation. This is 6 and documentation. Right. Okay. GitHub. Here is what we have so far on this. Okay, that might actually be in square brackets then. Okay, essentially one of the two will make this into an actual link. Okay, that looks fine, yeah. That looks fine so far. Alright, so we're going to put, I believe it's 3 asterisks for bold. We're going to say description. Or we can just put the description in bold. I think it's 3 asterisks and then, or no, it's 3 backticks, I think. Actually, let me go look this up. GitHub Markdown. Oh, it's 2 asterisks on each side. So we're gonna say this setting controls whether or not the dialog system is enabled when the game starts. Set this to true to enable the system at the start of the game. Oh, so if you add 2 or more spaces to the end of a line, it adds a line break automatically. Okay. So you don't need to use those, we just have to put 2 spaces. So 1, 2. Okay. So what I used to do with this is I'd used to put like description and the type, but we're not going to do that on this. We're just going to put the actual data, right? So description, type, then the default value for this. So we're going to have the thing here. We're going to say boolean, and default will be false. Well, this one I think will be true. This is like the main one. If this was like for a optional thing or some other thing, not like to enable or disable the entire plugin, I would say make it false. So if it's like for third-party support, third-party plugin support, leave it as false. But in this case, it's the turn on and off the main plugin, so we'll default to true. Now you might be wondering why I put the default value. Well, it just makes it easy so that if you have a complex series of options that are like, you know, value settings that control things, and the devs go through and mess around with a lot of stuff, they can just refer back to this really easily and say, okay, here was the default value, I'm going to put it back to this so I can start over again without having to like nuke their plugin and re-add it. So it's always good to put the default values in. Alright, so there's that. Text game variable. So, this setting sets the game variable that will be used to store the current NPC dialog to display. You could also say if they're required or not, like for example, you could say the setting, like we could put like a thing that says required here. Is there a way to make this specifically highlighted? In some cases you can use some basic level formatting. Okay. So yeah, so obviously this one is either true or false. We're going to put a thing here that says required, because the plugin won't work without this. So this is going to be a game variable. So type and default is 001. This is the default. So next one up is gonna be the map data. So map data, pretty big one here. Let's see, this setting contains the configuration for each map and each NPC on those maps that the dialog system should apply to. For more information on how to configure the setting, see the, what do I call this, configuration settings. There's a way to turn these into like links to make them go to sections, and I think you just do this in like a hashtag and then the name of the thing or something. But there's a way to make these actually be links you can click to go to a different section in the page. I've done it before on a couple of plugins. Configuration settings section below. One thing you'll need to make sure you don't have, if you're going to use the spaces method for this, is make sure you don't have, there's an option in the settings you can have turned on for this, which I just realized that I do. Where is the settings at? Preferences? Settings. Called white space. Yeah, this trailing auto inserted white space. Turn this off. If you have this on, it's going to trim the white space at the end of your lines, and you won't have this double spacing at the end of it. It'll get removed. So make sure that you take that setting off for when you're working on your documentation. I'd recommend you turn it on for every other part of the development process, because you're going to end up with white space all over the place. Makes it really easy to deal with if you don't have to actually physically deal with it and just let the editor do it for you. So this is going to be required. So I'm not going to put what the type. I'm just going to say this is an object. That's really what it is. And the default is just going to be, there'll be no default there on this one. Alright, then I think we have another 2 to go. So this is going to be our default dialog. This setting sets the dialog shown when by an NPC when there is no valid dialog available to be shown. This only applies to configured NPCs. Oh, and okay. I mean, it's not necessarily required, so I'm not going to put that there. Text, and the default is hello P1. I have a P0 right now at the moment, but it should be P1. Okay, last one, it should be 2. So the last one here is the unconfigured NPC dialog. This setting sets the dialog to be displayed when calling the plugin command on an NPC from an NPC. That either has not been configured for the current map, or whose map is not configured, the map data plugin setting. I'll make a note here. This is meant to be used as a development debugging tool. An option to turn this output off or on will be added in a future version. So we're kind of like putting in here hints of things that we're going to be adding in. We're going to actually explicitly state what might be coming. Obviously, we're not going to actually be adding them. This is more just for your benefit of seeing how you would word things and how you would do these. So then this is also text. And then this MCR map has not been configured. I'm just going to go pull the dialog text from the actual setting. That was a new line test, which we never got to work fully, I don't think. Okay, so that is the plugin settings. Plugin commands next. So between each major section, I do two. Between each major headings, like if I have like a 3 heading and then I go back to a 2, there's going to be 3 spaces. So right now we're still doing just 2 because we're going between 2 headings of the same type. 3 and 3. Well, actually, we're going to go to 4 and we're going back up to 3. No, yeah, this is, yeah, no, this would be for, we do 3 on this one. Yeah, because that is going from 4 to 3. So anytime I go from a lower level heading to a higher level heading, I put 3 spaces in instead of 2. If we're going between 2 of the same level headings, it's just 2 spaces. Just how I sort and organize my stuff. So if we go and actually save this and push this up to the whoops. Up to the thing here. Oof, it actually removed the spacing. And these aren't working. You lied to me. Oh, there are no spaces between the bold. Okay, there's no spaces between these and the bold text. It should go like this. Ah, okay. It's fine as it shows it with a space when it's doing this, just a general thing, because it's like, you know. So with valid markdown, I guess it turns blue. If it's like an actual like markdown syntax thing like this. How do I get this to keep the spaces? So turn that setting off, but it still seems to be doing its thing. Which again is very annoying because we want it to not do that. Let me try looking at this again. Maybe there's more than one. Trim trailing. Oh, here we go. That's the one I actually want to trim that off. I want to turn them both off, I think. Okay, that should do it now. Put in all of our spaces again. Actually, I think we got an automatic space after the heading, so we don't need to put those in there. Okay. There we go. So now you can kind of see this here. It kind of gets confusing though. They're all bolded, aren't they? So maybe we only do bolding on if it's required or not. Otherwise, we just leave them normal highlighting sort of stuff, normal text. I'm trying to figure out the best way to style your documentation is a pain at times. Okay, let's see how that looks. Okay, that's better. That's a little more condensed here now. Cool, yeah, I'll take that. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Plugging commands. We only have 2 of these, so this is gonna go pretty fast here. Alright, so for plugging commands, what I like to do is I like to explain what they are, so kind of like we do here. Then I like to do the parameter list and the have parameters, and then to do an example of them. So let me go grab one of these NPCs. This one's probably the best because we actually have both of them here. Oh, this is interesting. I must not have saved the project. No, it's definitely there. Oh, right. Okay, I remember now. We took out the ID, dialog ID parameter. Yeah. Okay. Alright, so let me open this up, copy this over. Alright, and then let's put this down here for a moment. So plugging commands, then 1, 2, 3, 4. Then we're going to put an actual command, so tutorial.dialog selector get dialog. And then what I'll do is I'll put in the param names in brackets like this, and angle brackets. So we're going to say map ID and then NPC ID. Okay, then the description. Let's see. This plugin command allows you to call the get dialog function to get the dialog that matches current configuration settings. Oh, this is interesting. So get the current valid dialog for the NPC for an NPC on a specific map. Note that map ID must be the ID of the current map, the NPC event is on, currently on, or the system will prevent show the default text set in the or no, this would be the unconfigured. The unconfigured NPC dialog setting. So I do 2 spaces, then we have parameters. And then this is going to be a list. So for a list, what you want to do is you want to do a minus sign, then a space. And then you're going to put in your list 1 item, so list item 1. And then you want to do a tab, or 4 spaces. Then, or actually it's 2 spaces. You want to go underneath the L, put another one, and then say list, sublist item. If we send this up, it's going to show you what that looks like. Yeah, so you get this kind of structure here. So okay, so what I'm going to say is this is going to be our first parameter, which is map ID. And then I put the description for what that is below here. Sets the ID for the map that the current NPC is on. Must match the ID for the current map. And then 2 is going to be the NPC ID. I like to try and keep the naming convention. Whatever I name the parameters up here, I use that down here, just so that it matches. It's easier to kind of connect the 2 together. So for this is going to be sets the NPC ID that the plugin should look for to find the proper dialog configuration for. That's what to do there. And then the example. So for this now, you want to do 2 or 3 backticks. What is this gonna be? For a code box. Oh, it's a single backtick. Oh no, 3 backticks for so a single backtick around the dialogue for from the text for inline, or 3 backticks at the beginning and end of the multiple lines of code. So in my case, I always do 3 backticks around it like this, but you could actually technically just do 1 like this in this case. But I do it like this. Just it looks better, more correct here. Alright, and then we have one more, and that's going to be the this. So tutorial.dialog selector enable dialog system 1.0. This plugin command allows you to enable or disable the dialog system from an NPC within the game when the system I'm gonna say when it should be turned off. Just like I said, when it's turned off, you can turn it off from within the game itself. So like if you want to have a section where the dialog plugin is not being used for whatever reason, that's how you would do it. 0 means that the system is disabled, while 1 means that the system is enabled. Okay, and parameters. So 0 equals disabled, 1 equals enabled. Okay. Okay. I was using an example just because it again gives the dev another point, another option for looking up how things are used and how they're properly configured and whatnot. Because what they would otherwise have to do is go into the project to find that, right? Which could be kind of hard. So you say, okay, here, it's right here. You just can copy it from here if you want to use it the way it is. Alright, so that's all the plugin commands. Now we're going to do another 3. So 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to put this one as a level 3. Configuration settings, right? So we decided to call that. Yeah. This section will detail how to configure the map data plugin setting for use of plugin. Alright, so then we just go through and essentially this is more of like an instructional thing of how to configure the plugin. So obviously the first step is going to be the map configuration. So I'm just open this up real fast. So that's what they refer to. Sometimes I'll go through and like define each setting as they're going through it, kind of like I would do with the other ones. I don't normally, when we have like an object setting, I don't go through and do the object settings. I just do the top level ones, right? And then in the configuration stuff like this, I'll go more into detail. In this case, I don't think we have to go that far down because it's pretty simple. You know, it's like 2 different options, and then that's it. So we really don't have to go into like the whole do everything kind of thing. But I have gone through in times and actually gone through and done everything. If the complexity was enough to warrant it. So the first level of configuration is to set up the configuration records for each map that will be a part that will contain NPCs that are a part of the dialogue system. If an NPC does not use the get dialog it does not need to be figured here, and if no NPCs on a map use it either, then the map doesn't need figured either. Okay. In this case, let's do the 2 enters. Makes more sense this way. These are more like paragraphs here. First step is to identify the map ID for the map you are I also suggest using contractions a lot instead of spelling out like you are as you are, do your. Because it's more natural reading kind of rhythm to do that. And the same thing with like regular dialogue, right? Using contractions is a good way to make your characters feel like they're more real, as opposed to having like not use contractions and just, you know, like you are this or you are that or this is that or what have you. Instead of saying this is your, I'm kind of stuff. Even if you think it breaks immersion because it's like maybe your game takes place in like maybe like more medieval era or something where they didn't necessarily use those kind of contractions, I would say still put them in occasionally, just because it gives your characters more of a real, you know, they feel more real that way. Same thing with your dialogue with your documentation too. Use contractions whenever you can. Can find this easily by looking at the bottom of the editor window and the footer bar on the right side. You should see some values. Of which the leftmost one is your map ID and name. Use this map ID for the map ID setting. Next, you'll need to set up the NPC configurations. Each NPC there we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4 npc configuration. So this is the second level of configuration. For the plugin. Here you will, like you did with the map configuration, locate the npc ID. Okay, and then dialog configuration. This is the final level of configuration for the plugin. To configure dialog for use by the NPC. Create new rows by clicking and then empty space in the empty space in the list. So if I do that, we're going to see conditions and then the dialog. Should then see with the conditions and dialog settings. See, dialog is the text that the NPC should use when the conditions are met. Conditions is the list of switch IDs, switches that should be turned on in order for the NPC to use this specific dialog. If there should be no conditions, such as for setting up default text, then leave the conditions setting blank. Let's say empty. Leave the condition setting set to the default value. So, when adding conditions, be asked to select the switch from a dropdown. Can we actually name them here or no? I think we can. It opens up like the actual, yeah. It is advisable to separate your dialog switches from your other switches and to name them at this point so that they can easily be found and understood later. Okay, so that's all the configuration stuff we need there. All right, so after this now, we'll put this here. Put for more specifics on how data can be configured. See the plugin project for examples. Okay, so next section, website configuration done. This is going to be the, so we're going to put planned features. So it's 3 here, so, or no, I think it's 2 actually, because we're out of the configuration. Actually, it says plugin information. Actually, because we're outside of plugin information too, so it should be another 2. So. Planned feature enhancements. And for this, I just like to do a list. So we're just going to say ability to turn on or off Ganfly ability to turn on or off unconfigured PC dialog setting. What else might we have? The only thing I can think of is that stuff for now. Maybe we'll put in something else like because that is a problem. I'll have to figure that out for my version of the plugin. So I usually have that as like planned and feature enhancements, and then if I have anything that's like a possible enhancement, I'll put that in a new section underneath that. So in this case, we're just going to say none at this time. And then we'll have changelog. So this is just like the version that you have currently and what changes you made for that version. So in our case, we're going to say version 0.1. Initial version of plugins, that's all it's going to have. But then as you create new versions, you're going to put in like another, essentially add in another one of these, and it's like version 2, 0.2. And let's like say, like for example, if you did any bug fixes, you'd have a thing in here that, normally what I would do is I'd have what section I would say, like new features. And then underneath that, I have my features listed as, you know, feature 1. Feature 2. I'd do a space between those. And then I would say bug fixes. Something like that. So let's go ahead and put 2 in between there. Let's go ahead and save this. Let's go ahead and push it up and see what it looks like. Alright, so we have our first documentation done here. So you can see things look pretty clean looking. Things are well grouped. Also at the top here, if you're using the headings, it'll automatically have a table of contents up here that you can easily search and scroll through to find specific things. So makes it really easy to kind of go through and find stuff. So you kind of see the benefit of using this, using GitHub as your documentation page, right? Because you get this level of configuration and styling that you don't get with just the help text box. Granted, it's not perfect, and it still takes a hell of a long time to do, but it looks way, way better than, you know, your average help thing in the actual editor. Like, for example, here's an example of something you can't do in the editor. Where's the... Here we go. Like, you can't put images in the editor to show different visual features and modes and things. Yeah, and underneath the plugin commands, if you have note tags, that's where I put those at. And then conflicts, I didn't put that in, but there's also a conflict section that I normally put into if there are any conflicts. This is also important if you know of any conflicts to put them in, so people know exactly what to expect. Here's how I did before. So I had like a header thing, so the name, version, demo, project, conflicts. It's kind of like a brief summary if there aren't any, and the terms of use. And then like a more, it's actually probably a better way of doing the documentation. It's more natural feeling than what we have on our example over here, but what we have over here is fine. You know, this is just fine for this. All right, so where are we at time-wise with this? Hour and 15, okay. So let's talk about the core plugin here. This is not going to be too long, right? Maybe 15 minutes tops. This is going to be like a one-part episode, I think. So first of all, let me just go ahead and we're going to create a new folder for this because we're going to need to have this eventually. So let's just do this now. New folder, we're going to call it plugin 2 core plugin. So, what is a core plugin? You might be wondering. Well, crap, go back this way. There we go. So, core plugins are something you don't see very often, but you do see like for plugin devs that have a bunch of plugins, right? You'll see these. But for people that don't do too many plugins, they have a couple here and there, you may not normally see this. However, it should be used way more often. I'm just going to go ahead and open up a new window for this. Need to create a new workspace and everything, so let's go ahead and add a folder to the workspace. Git add all git commit am. There, you stupid piece of... Okay. All that for this. Alright, so what a core plugin is a plugin that stores a bunch of like things, right? So if you're using like code of a bunch of different places all over your plugins, that isn't related to one specific plugin or even a group of specific plugins. And there's no like specific code in those functions or features that are unique to that plugin that are used in multiple plugins, in fact, then those things are good candidates to be moved to a core plugin. So essentially a core plugin is kind of a dumping ground for all of your reused or common functionality between all your plugins. One of the other things that you can do with it is if you have note tags that you're using, the core plugin allows you to do all your note tag processing from within the core plugin itself. We won't be using this as an example. We will just kind of write up a basic one, because I think we'll probably be using the that code we did to process the data structure that we built for the Dialog Selector plugin. We're going to move that into here because that's going to be reused more likely than not. But we're going to use my core plugin as the example and kind of go through what everything is. First, let's just go ahead and tutorial plugins. Plugins or plugins 2? I forget what I named the thing. We'll have to rename it probably. Tutorial plugin 1. Okay, it's tutorial plugin 2. Then the plugin name. Plugin 2 underscore core plugin. And this is something we'll build up over time, right? So let me go ahead and go back over to here. We're going to close. Well, we don't necessarily need to close this. We just need to open the workspace for file. And we're going to go back up to here. I'm going to go over to Get Projects. I'm going to open up my arbitrary plugins, and then my core plugin workspace. Okay. So I just want to grab this really fast. So jam this over here. Alright, so how a core plugin works is essentially you define stuff in the global space, right? So you don't like put it within a it's called like a self-contained function. You don't create functions or anything like that. You're actually just essentially defining, well, not directly, but you're defining global space variables to store data and then to access that data from any plugin that you are using that in. So in my case, like for my plugin, I have a global plugin, a global variable called LP Games Core. It's an object. And then I have a temp one for loading data from the save file. Then below that we have a thing to bring in the plugin parameters from the plugin settings, because I have one plugin setting for this that allows you to add a space between an icon and a name, and like for like an item or a skill. So it allows you to turn that on or off if you want it. And so that brings in that particular setting, and then sets it up for a global variable here. So once we have this defined, we then set up all the properties for this LP Games Core variable object variable that we have here. So we have core settings, which is essentially set to an empty object. Then within that we have plugins. And so what I'm using this for is to say, okay, here are the plugins that the core plugin works for, that it has support for, and that's essentially going to be a list of all my plugins eventually. I just have these ones configured right now because these are the ones I'm kind of building this alongside of. So we have the name of the plugin, and then if it's installed or not, because if you have it, if it's added and turned on, we have some code to check the plugin manager to see if you have the plugin even installed and turned on. And then if you do, we're going to set the install to true, and that's going to trigger off a bunch of things that will happen depending on what you need. We need those particular what those particular plugins need. Below that we have plugin settings. So this is global plugin settings, things that some plugins might set that other plugins might need. It's like, say one plugin is, I think I have like maybe one specific thing I'm using this for at the moment, and I can't remember what it is, but let's say like your plugin setting a global variable that's essentially saying that if this is turned on, other plugins that use similar systems to this particular plugin are going to behave a certain way that they wouldn't otherwise behave. That kind of thing. Then below that is plugin parameters. So this is all the parameters for each individual plugin. So remember how we have these brought in this way on the tutorial plugin? Well, we're doing the same similar thing, except instead of storing all those plugin variables in the plugin file as like variables, global variables to the plugin, we're loading them into the plugin parameters property for the core plugin. And then this is going to have essentially the name of the plugin, and then that becomes a key for a property, and then the value for that property is the another object that has all the variables for variable names as the keys to the actual values as the values. It's like, for example, to use this up here real quick, I would put let's say this is in the Dialog Selector plugin, right? And we have this thing here. What would happen is that we'd set up, so it would be plugin parameters dot dialog selector dot be add icon space, or maybe just add icon space, and that would just be the value that we get from this, so true or false. And that's how that would be set up. And then we'd access that value using the core plugin parameters. Plugin data stores specific data objects for plugins. We haven't used this yet. So what this is like, say you have a more advanced plugin that has specific configuration data that you are building up through like processing over note tags in the database, and you are essentially building additional data for skills and items and things that you need to have for those, but you don't want to necessarily throw on into the actual database data. In general, you don't want to really mess around with the database data, even though it's a little bit easier to handle that way. What I like to do is I like to actually create another, kind of like a shadow, not a shadow copy, but like a shadow database, shadow plugin database objects. And then those shadow objects only have the data that's added from my plugin in there, so or plugins in there, because this actually has oh wait, no, I'm thinking about later on the database data. But like say like this is actually plugin configuration data. So like, for example, Dialog Selector plugin, the map data would be stored in here. So it'd be plugin data dot Dialog Selector dot map data would be stored inside of this. Actually, you know what? No, I'm forgetting what all these are. I have not used worked on any of these plugins for a couple months now. I'm confusing this again. This is actually plugin data that you change over time. So plugin parameters are the parameters. This is for data that a plugin actually will generate. So dialing back again. So I even have examples of here, goddammit. So like, for example, for the codex, as you're using the codex plugin, what happens is that you learn new data, right? You learn new information throughout the game, and that codex data is updated. So you might have an entry that has nothing in it at first. You learn something that gets added to the codex entry. You learn more stuff, those get added to that codex entry, and eventually you have the codex entry is, you know, not what it was in the default state, so you have to save that state, the updated version of it, essentially, to the save file. And that's what this allows you to do. It stores the object data that you create for your plugin, and then you just update that, and then that's used to load into your save files and load from your save files back into this, so that you can continue using the updated data for the game. So if you have a plugin that is generating new data, it's not using existing data in the like a plugin setting that isn't changing. You're actually changing values, changing data, adding new data due to things the player is doing. You would store that in something like this. And that's how I do it anyway, because it keeps it very specific and cordoned off from everything else. Now the other thing. So if I have a plugin that's modifying database data, or adding database data through note tag stuff, I put it into its own thing. I don't store it in the game, in the database data itself. I used to do that, but then it got to a point where it was just way too hard to keep track of everything that was new versus what was, you know, not my stuff. So the other part of it is that I was having to deal with situations where we'd have multiple plugins having multiple things, and you'd have to handle all that separately and parse the note tags out specifically in each plugin for only the stuff they're looking for. And it was just a mess. So what I did was I said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to handle all my note tag processing within my core plugin. We'll talk about this a little more later, more detail later, but it's kind of basically covered here. One, it's going to make things load faster, and two, we can then load all the plugin data, all the plugins that I have, all the data they create on the objects together, stored in one place, and get it from one place. Instead of having that data stored over multiple different plugins in different places. That way, if another plugin needs some data from some other plugin, it can get it pretty easily just by going into the core plugin. And two, it makes it much easier to then resave this data when you're saving the game, because this is stuff that you could potentially want to save to your save file. If you're modifying things, like in the case of the Magic Schools plugin I have and the Magic Crafting plugin I'm using, it does modify the database data. So it's going to be modifying this data. I need to save this data to the save file and load it from the save file so that it, persists over play sessions. So that's what all this is for. Again, highly recommend you do something like this just to segment out your configuration for your plugin or plugins from the data that's normally in the game, the $ game or skill data, class data, that kind of stuff. The normal RPG Maker data, keep your stuff away from that essentially. And then I have another set of these for the actual note tag data. So if we have the specific note tag stuff that's added through note tags gets put into here, and then if we have any new records created, they get put up to here. I kind of conflated these two again because I'm, again, kind of relearning this as we go. So what I do with these is if there's any new records we're adding, they get put into here on saving. They do get modified. These also do get put into the normal ones, the database data ones, the game database, engine database data stuff, because it needs to be there. But it also gets put here, just so we can load it and save it more easily. Then all the note tag stuff goes into these plugin note tag data ones down here. So we get all the stuff we need to from these. So common settings, these are things that are used across multiple plugins. For here I'm using obfuscation stuff. So for example, what this is doing is it allows me to, for plugins I have where there's an option to hide data from the player. There are different modes you can use, and some of them use characters to replace other characters. So like essentially replacing the name of a item you haven't found yet with question marks, like what this is showing. So we have the obfuscation character, the number of characters to obfuscate, maximum, and then whether or not the system is turned on. Then I have a setting to turn on window scrolling for plugins that have window scrolling. What essentially this is it's a thing that I found in Yanfly's Quest plugin that allows you to scroll through the Quest window. I essentially lifted the code that Yanfly made to modify the touch input classes to allow you to essentially detect when the mouse goes into a window on hover, and then you can just scroll through with the mouse wheel. I took that and I've put it into my core plugin here, and essentially made it a global kind of setting for all my plugins that I can use if I need to use that feature for them. So down here, these are what are called static variables. They are essentially variables that store data that's not going to change. And what I'm doing with these is basically I'm taking data, the various lists from the editor. So like, for example, the damage type list, and putting them in here so that when I go through and do stuff with the Codex plugin, I can have the text representation of the IDs. Like whenever you when you go in there and select a damage type from the damage type list on a skill, that drop down creates an ID property on the actual record in the database. So I can use that ID record and then get the proper text value again in the game using this kind of a list. So most of the stuff in here you're going to see is going to be for probably the Codex plugin, because it does a lot of stuff like this. So I got a bunch of different ones of these. They're broken down into two different lists, objects and lists. The object ones are things where you have essentially like a kind of a overarching sort of category, and then within that you have multiple separate categories. Usually what I'm using this for is for either icons or for traits and things. Lists are just basic string lists. For example, down here, so trait mapping, trait object mapping. So like if you have a trait code 21, that's going to be a standard parameter. So I have the standard parameter strings in here. 22 is a special parameter. 23 is extended parameter. 55 is the wielding condition. So whether it's a dual wielded weapon or a normal wield. So essentially we'll turn the second, the shield slot into a second weapon slot. And like all those other kind of drop downs from the trait list as well. Same thing with the icons here. So 11 for the 11 for the trait map is for elemental properties. So this is the icon map for all the elements that I have in the game. So down here we have all the common utility functions. So this is again, these are functions that are inside of a object. So this is like stuff that's used by multiple plugins. And it's like, you know, some pretty chunky code. So putting it all together into here saved a lot of room on a lot of different plugins. Essentially reduced down the amount of code over those plugins by about 30%. So essentially we set up a new object called functions, and then in that we actually build the functions. If you want to, you could use an arrow operator here, and how that would look like would be, you wouldn't use function like that, you would do this, and then you would use this. And essentially it's a function, it's a different way to write a function. It's a shorthand. There are some benefits to doing that, but nothing that we would notice for this. So in the case of build trait list, this is going through and building out a actual string list of all the different parameters that you have. So like if you have some states on your skill or something, skill use effects. If you have like some stat effects on your weapon, what this will do is it go down to states, go through the state code, and then it'll build out a string that says, okay, here's the icon for the status effect, here's the name of the status effect, and then it'll put it onto, and maybe I think also for certain ones it'll show the percentage chance of infliction on hit for that status effect, and it'll put that into the list, and then we can use that list to then display it in the codex or wherever we need to. And so there's like some of those for all these different traits. Then we have some if statement checks on a for loop to see if particular trait codes, and I actually have all these codes kind of mapped out as to what they are. If we have anything for these lists, for these trait codes, then we go and build out the actual strings, and then return them back and return the fully compiled trait object back. We do the same thing for effects later on. These are all the specific functions that we're calling from up here. It's a lot of code. So you can see, so I had this in at least 3 different plugins I had this stuff in. So it allowed me to, I still have to do this, it allowed me to really clean up those plugins quite a lot. Then we have one for effects down here. Same thing as with traits, just with effects. So different codes, different functions. Same kind of similar process though. Then we get down here to like, here's the obfuscation stuff that we were talking about a little bit earlier. Here's the functions now for that. Get display name, so get the display name of a string of a weapon, of a stats effect, of a skill. If we want it to be obfuscated, then we obfuscate it. Get calculated text height. So this gets for the scroll window, and it gets essentially a calculated height for the window that the window should have for the content of it, so that it can be scrollable. Item name builders, we got different name builders that will go through the different phases and get the name called the get display name function we just talked about a little bit ago. If we need to put in the icon in, it'll call the icon prefix builder to do that, and return the fully configured name that way. If there are any aliases that we're using, it'll build those into. Process cursor move, so I actually rewrote the way that select windows operate, and this is what this code does. And again, that'll make a lot of this will make more sense as we go talking about windows and things and how things can be displayed, because this is more, most of the stuff in here is dealing with windows and displaying things in windows. Required skill level, used for a couple different things to determine if the skill level matches what the character level is. Window scrolling stuff, conditional aliases. So this is the function for whether or not the scrolling thing is enabled, and if it is enabled, we then allow this custom code for the touch input class to actually be run. Otherwise, we don't run this code, so it doesn't allow you to scroll any windows. I would recommend doing something similar. So if you have some code you're building out that you're going to use in multiple plugins that allows you to do something specific like this, I would say always wrap it in a boolean to turn on and off, and when you don't need it anymore. Just because when you don't need it, you should turn it off. It's the best policy, right? So when I'm not in an actual plugin scene where I'm not using this, I turn it off so it doesn't cause any kind of issues. There are a bunch of setter functions for some of those other properties, so I can actually set these properly. So again, obfuscation and encapsulation of the actual settings for the core plugin that the plugins really shouldn't have direct access to. They have functions to set those and to get those, so that they can actually get those values if they need them. So still keeping some OOP stuff in consideration here with how this is built. And then we have a bunch of other things here, so like alias coding, core aliases. So like for example, since I do a lot of saving, I have an actual make save contents function that's here now instead of in each plugin. This handles all the save data for all the plugins and all the other data that's in the core plugin itself. That way, we can just keep everything together like this. Same thing with the load function. We have one that loads all the data specifically, loads up all the different plugin data lists and things from the save file. Whole process to do this, very well worth it though, because it centralizes everything, so I don't have to worry about putting all this into every plugin that needs to have its data saved to a save file. Just set up in normally just set up as normal in the core plugin here, and the core plugin handles it on its own. Then we get to the big thing here, which is no tag processing. So we haven't worked with no tags yet, but we will eventually. And what a no tag essentially is in, like we talked about when we were going over the editor in episode 2. Let me close all this down so I can bring this over and show you stuff. Focus. Yeah, let's focus. Let me get this lined up. So if you remember when we were talking about this stuff in episode 2, a note tag is this thing down here, and what you can use this for is to put in configuration data per record in the database for an object for your plugin. So like if you want to have something that you're doing that's going to apply to specific actors, you would put your stuff into here. Now the way I normally do it is I have like a an opening tag that says something like LMP, and I'll have like the name of the plugin, so like character details. So it's like the name of the plugin's character details or something. So I'll have like a tag there. I'll have a closing tag, and then everything in between these two tags is going to be stuff that's for my plugin specifically. The reason I do it this way is, one, so that I can keep my stuff separated from everybody else's stuff, because a lot of other plugin developers don't even put a little bit of effort into making it so that their no tag stuff doesn't conflict with everybody else's, because some do, a lot don't. Yanfly doesn't do anything usually for this, which is a pain in the ass. So you should always put your own stuff within something like this so you can identify it. And one reason why it's important is because that way you can only process the stuff that's yours, and it keeps the processing of the no tag down to a minimum. Because if you have a bunch of Yanfly stuff in there, right? Yanfly's note tag stuff is massive sometimes, because you can actually do JavaScript coding in there. If you happen to have a plugin setting that, or a note tag attribute that matches something that Yanfly has for one of their plugins, or it's something that gets picked up in the processing for their plugin, it's going to get pulled into their plugin, and it's going to screw up the configuration for the object, because it's not a value that it's expecting, it's something for your own plugin. So keeping things within tags you can like look at and say, okay, here's where my stuff starts, here's where it ends, anything in between I want, ignore everything else. One, keeps your stuff away from everybody else's stuff, at least in terms of your processing your stuff in your plugin, and it keeps it so you can say, once you hit that last tag, the closing tag, stop processing this no tag because we're done. It's not going to help you prevent your stuff from causing issues in other plugins that have note tags that process those note tags, because you still have to, unless they have something similar set up there, you're going to have to deal with that, right? That's part of like the whole conflicts thing. You're not going to be able to know what every plugin does, so you're going to have to rely heavily on user feedback for this. And if you find that you've used something for a note tag attribute that another plugin is using for theirs, you're going to have to change yours, essentially, because it's too much. It's going to be too much to expect another plugin dev to rearrange into their plugin to make it work correctly, because they didn't make it work the right way in the first place. So it just says something about them and their coding style. So always do this. You'll make everybody's lives easier, and especially the people that use your plugins, because then they know specifically what your stuff is, and can easily find it. So you put those in there, and actually gets put into a note property on the object data, and you can get that in your plugin by looping over the database data and looking for the note property. So in this case, we're looking at class data. So what I'm doing here is we're looping over class data. I have a plugin name, and I'm trying to think of what the BM plugin settings, no tag start. I think there's a okay, I haven't actually finished setting up everything yet. I have it on item and skills though. So essentially we have this tag parameter, and the tag parameter is the plugin name, LMP, then the plugin name. And how I'm getting that is I have a plugin names that are passing through. We loop through that, find the tag, the current tag for that plugin, and then we look for if the skill note includes that tag. If it does, or has that in it, if the note data has that in it, that particular phrase in it, then we go into this, we get the note tag data, we do a string split on note on return carriage, which is what this is, and new line. So essentially this is what you get when you enter in a note tag box. It puts in these invisible characters to move your cursor down to a new line. So we do a split on that. So we have essentially a this note data will have as an array of all the different lines in your note tag box. That's what this ends up being. And then for the tag, we split it on the underscore, the first underscore, so we keep all the other underscores there. Well, actually, we split it on underscore, and then we pull the second element out because we want the plugin name. And then that gets put into the start and end note tag. Then I have this LMP underscore and this slash LMP underscore for the start and end, and then the plugin name there. So this gets built on the fly for each plugin that we're looking at. And then we go through the note tag data. We have a huge thing here of data because we have to essentially create defaults for every database item property we're importing through our plugins. So I just essentially create a default value for every single one of them that I have, and they're all also they're all sort of prefixed a little bit here. Like for example, crafting. The crafting plugin is all the crafting plugin stuff. If there's something similar to it, has craft at the beginning of it. Item crafting. This is for magic actually. Then if it's the item crafting plugin, has item craft. Or no, crafting is just, these are used by both the magic and item crafting. Then if it's specifically for item or magic crafting, then we have item craft or magic craft. So if there's like plugins that use multiple plugins that use a parameter, but they're part of like a similar thing, like for example, these are all for crafting plugins, then I'll create like a communal prefix for them. And then I'll use that, like this is your actual, what you would type into the note tag box. So what you would do is, essentially if you want to put this setting into your attribute setting into your note tag, you would go back over here, and I just have this stuff still on, so it probably looks a little bit weird. So you go back over here into your thing, right, and in between here, you would type in that phrase, you do the colon, and then the value you'd want to use there. And then what would happen is, as it comes to this code, you're going to find this, then you're going to get the value, and then store that in this property. And that's what's going on down here. So, for plugin settings, we then split on the colon, and then based on what the attribute is, we then store the value, note lines 1, in the appropriate property up here with the correct type. So it's supposed to be an integer, we're parsing it to an int, and so on and so forth. It's supposed to be a float, we're parsing it to a float. And we do that for every object. So why I'm doing this here instead of in each plugin is because as you're processing your plugins and they're loading, it's going to load over all your data each time you have a plugin that's doing this, right? So if you have 4 plugins that have their own item note tag data, it's gonna, those 4 plugins will each process over the item database data for each time. Each one of those that loads is going to load and process through this data. So you're going to essentially run through all of your plugin note tag data for the item data 4 times. So you're quadrupling your load time with that, right? Because each plugin is going to reload sequentially. They're going to run through all the items. If you have a lot of items, it can add a lot of time. And you're not using all the data from the note tag, just the stuff you're looking at. By combining all that processing into one place, we're saying, okay, load the core plugin first. The core plugin says, okay, here are the plugins that I have. Here's all the data that we're looking for from the note tag attributes. The note tag attribute data for all the plugins. Create some default data for those. Then if we find that particular plugin is turned on, installed and turned on, then process through the item data, look at the note tag data for each item, and process that data into the appropriate properties for that plugin. So now you've made your loading more efficient because you're loading everything at once instead of sequentially. and it's all being done from the core plugin instead of each individual plugin. So there's less potential for issues to arise. There's less potential maintenance issues, like if you have to update something in one of the plugins that's common across all of them, you have to change that in all the plugins. If you have any conflicts with names in terms of like the attributes you're using, you have to address those per plugin. When you're using this kind of stuff in each individual plugin, when you have it all together like this in one plugin, you have it all here and you can just easily change it, right? By shifting all this over here like this, I increased my plugin loading time by about 40%. When I had more than 4 plugins running that access some level of database data. Not necessarily all running the same data from the same tables, but just database general data, or database data in general. Increased by about 40%. Same thing with skills too, as you can see here. So yeah, that's what a core plugin is for. That's what you can do with it. Again, core plugins can be kind of complex, but they are extremely useful for reducing code and for increasing performance. In addition to allowing you to keep things together, load and save data more easily, and build out common functionality between plugins into one place and not have to worry about maintaining it in every plugin, right? It does create the side effect of you requiring the developer to have your core plugin installed and using it to use your plugins, but the benefits outweigh that having to have another plugin kind of a drawback, right? Because it all happens from here. So yeah, that's what a core plugin is for our tutorial example. Though what we're just going to be doing is we're just going to be pulling in one thing, and that is not open because we closed the thing. Let's go ahead and reopen Database Selector. So essentially what we're going to be doing is we're just going to be going here. We're going to go to here. We're going to we're just going to copy this over for now. I'm not going to worry about doing all the specific configuration for this. We'll worry about that in the next next episode. So this will not technically be functional at the moment. We're going to put this over here, and we're just going to call this from here because other plugins we're going to use are going to use something similar in terms of like the way that we configure the map data plugin setting. We'll be using structs and some other plugins as well, so this will be useful to have here in the core plugin so we can call it from other places as well. But yeah, so that's going to be it for today. Trying to keep this down to 2 episodes. We're at about 2 hours. So cool. Thanks for watching. Comments, questions, leave them below as always, and you'll be able to find this up on the GitHub page. There'll be a link to the repository in the description. Again, this isn't fully functional at the moment. We'll make it fully functional in episode 8, because then we're going to be that'll be the first plugin where we're going to actually be working on a new plugin, and we'll be building some stuff in here for that. So we'll have to make this fully functional at that point. As for what the plugin is, I'll leave that as a surprise. So let's have to tune in for the next episode to find out what happens on the next episode of Plugin Ball Z. No, don't sue me, Funimation. No. Anyway, but yeah, I'll catch you guys later, and I'll see you in the next episode.